Pokemon Legends EA is finally confirmed to be on the Nintendo Switch 2. Guys, I knew there was something more to this game. I had a feeling after all that back and forth between GameFreak and Nintendo, the apologizing for the poor quality of Scarlet and Violet and the promise to give more time for GameFreak to develop and dedication to restructuring how the Pokemon company functions, yada yada. Yeah, after all that, I just knew it would be such a waste for ZA to simply be another Switch 1 Pokemon game and that be all it was. I really do love to say I told you so. Yeah, if you've been watching this channel already, you've known that a Switch 2 version of Pokemon Legends EA was in the works. We discovered this based on the statements made by the Terra Leaker a couple months after the Terra Leak itself happened. He mentioned that he did see the files for a Super Ikaku, which was the codename for Legends EA, and Super was the codenames for the Switch 2 editions of the Pokemon games. So now here we are, finally, with official news that ZA can be truly something special. I'm oh so glad they picked a Legends game to be the first next-gen Pokemon experience. Like, look at how good this looks. This shot alone tells you all you need to know about how much of an upgrade this will be for the game. And we're gonna talk about the technical aspects that make this scene pop in ways that the Switch 1 version just didn't. But before that, we need to cover quite a bit of ground regarding what this means for Pokemon going forward, what the Switch 2 has to offer this series. Then after that, we'll talk about the specifics on what's improved so much visually for the game. Okay, so first, let's discuss the fact that Pokemon is now on hardware that gives an insanely good baseline for graphics and performance. We're at a point now where if Game Freak had even made Scarlet and Violet on the Switch 2, it would have ran fine. Now that's not to say it was the Switch 1's fault Scarlet and Violet ran poorly, because it wasn't. It's more so that Game Freak didn't plan properly or take the hardware into account when implementing certain things like the lighting engine. In SV, Game Freak prioritized things like an advanced lighting system and reflection techniques over things like higher quality textures, assets, environments, and overall polish for glitches. Couple this with how insanely bloated Game Freak's coding gets from their copy-paste philosophy for developing, and we had an entire whole ass mess with Scarlet and Violet struggling to run on Switch 1. Now, as sloppy as this was from Game Freak, if the hardware for SV was the Switch 2, then none of that probably would have mattered. Well, at least a lot of it, not all of it, because there's only so much that better hardware can do when it comes to bad coding. And yeah, that's not great as far as the competency of whichever team at Game Freak made that game goes, but it's nothing but a plus for fans who just want a functioning, fun game out of the Pokemon franchise. Now, Legends EA showed much higher developer competency for Switch 1 compared to Scarlet and Violet already. I've discussed why we know this in previous videos, but to summarize in the simplest terms for the purposes of this video, let's just say it's mainly due to Game Freak prioritizing the correct graphical systems and limiting the scope of their game on purpose to craft something more worthwhile in the long run. However, thanks to the Switch 2, we're gonna get to experience Pokemon in ways we've never gotten to before, and that includes in Legends ZA. Because ZA was already optimized well for Switch 1, the Switch 2 version gets to take full advantage of all the benefits that come from the Switch 2 upgrade features. For example, this will be the first mainline Pokemon game in 60 frames per second. We get to see this already in motion during the trailer that we got for the Switch 2 edition. On top of that, we're likely getting a 4K resolution. There's even a chance we'll have 120 frames per second, but I really don't see much of a point to that, so I'm definitely excited for the 60 FPS 4K visuals at the very least. The kinds of shaders and techniques that Game Freak can allow the game to implement in the Switch 2 version will also be more advanced, and I can't wait to see this fully realized when we get our hands on it. Which means, now is a good time to talk about those things that we saw within this new trailer and how much better the visuals will be now that we're working with the Switch 2 hardware. The first shot reveals so much, and even to the untrained eye, the difference in quality between this scene and anything we had seen so far is stark. For one, the lighting engine here is a far cry from the super basic one we saw in previous trailers. We get much more natural lighting with ambient occlusion on the mountains and buildings. We see naturally formed light rays and shining assets from where the light hits them. They're glorious effects that weren't present in the Switch 1 footage for good reason. And they've also added actual depth of field effect instead of faking it with rendered distance fog. You'll also notice some glow and bloom lighting from the artificial lights emanating from the buildings, including Prism Tower itself. This carries over to the next scene where the shadows cast by buildings and trees not only look crisper, but are believable by where they fall. We even see the lighting and shadows affect the Pokemon in the park. Even in the scene with Ampharos Mega evolving, we get to witness some added bloom lighting emanating from the light posts and apartment buildings in the background. Now, that's not to say GameFreak is immune to messing up the presentation of these games, even on the Switch 2 hardware. After all, quite a few of the assets and textures still look pretty blurry and basic. And there's still that glaring visual glitch of our Pokemon finishing a fight and rotating on their axis without using their turning animation. Like, GameFreak, what is this? But all in all, so long as GameFreak's future resides on the Switch 2's hardware, they might be able to focus more on these polishing aspects since the hardware will give them more leeway on the actual graphical fidelity of their games. It does suck that they still need training wheels on their work 8 years into developing for home console technology, but I'm starting to think that we can only go up from here, hopefully. Either way, if this is what a Switch 1 Pokemon game looks like upgraded to Switch 2, I'm excited to see what a Pokemon game created from scratch solely for the Switch 2 will look like. Heck, that even goes for every Nintendo franchise. They all look phenomenal with the upgrades on their Switch 2 editions, but after seeing Final Fantasy VII Remake and Elden Ring on Switch 2, it's safe to say Nintendo's IPs are about to look way better than they ever have when they get their actual dedicated Switch 2 games in the next few years. It's safe to say I'm excited for Legends EA, and especially the Switch 2 version. The possibilities seem endless going forward for Pokemon, but what did you think of this news? Let us know if you're happy with this, or if you think Game Freak will still be bogged down by all the same snags as before. Afterwards, check out more of my videos like my breakdown on how we know the performance for Pokemon Legends EA will be so much better than SV. The link is right in front of you or in the pinned comment. If you'd like to support me and have your name featured at the end of all of my videos, then join my Patreon with the link in front of you or in the description. And I've been JotoJohnny, and I will catch you all there.